Thank you, PK, for the introduction. So yesterday we heard a little on the drug-coated technology and mortality controversy. Today I'm going to spend hopefully these 10 minutes trying to convince you that we don't have to worry about this any longer. These are my disclosures. So I'll start with where the FDA left us, which is August 2019. We had a safety panel in DC in June 2019. We went through all the data. We had a lot of debates. And what came out of that panel was these devices stayed on the market, but with that really strongly worded letter to providers and black box warning that these devices may be associated with increased mortality, that they should be used selectively, that we should be considering other treatment options if available, and only consider treating patients who are at high risk for restenosis. So what have we done since August 2019? There was a list of requests from the FDA. There was a list of requests from societies. And this is just a glimpse of what's been done, again, in a 2-year period. I'm going to start by going through the randomized trial data, and then I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about some real-world evidence. So Voyager PAD. So we've talked a lot about Voyager PAD throughout these couple of days of the conference. We know this is a randomized trial that primarily looked at Xarelto 2.5 milligrams twice a day after a peripheral vascular intervention, either endovascular surgical, in addition to aspirin plus or minus clopidogrel. Well, these are the 4,300 patients who underwent endovascular treatment in that trial, and this is stratified by whether they received a drug-coated or non-drug-coated device. So I show you here the Kaplan-Meier curve for just the non-drug-coated device at 42 months, and this is for drug-coated devices. So again, non-randomized is the secondary sub-analysis, but showing you here that mortality was similar between those treated with drug-coated and non-drug-coated devices in a randomized trial that underwent adjudication for endpoints and treatment. And this is going to be in JACC in a couple weeks. Also important from this was the causes of death. And this is a very simple figure for a reason. Cardiovascular, non-cardiovascular causes. On the left here is for non-drug-coated devices. On the right is for drug-coated devices. Similar causes of death by large categories between those treated with each device. We also have a randomized trial now. So wedepad was a trial that was halted during the controversy and then restarted once we've kind of parsed through the data. It was slow to re-enroll, but they were able to look at an interim analysis specifically for all-cause mortality that involved 2,300 patients. This is actually 2 trials combined. There's a critical limb ischemia trial and an intermittent claudication trial, but they combined them for this analysis. Median follow-up was 2.5 years. Again, the first signal of harm from the Katsanos meta-analysis was at 2 years. So this surpassed that first signal of harm, but they also had data extending out to 4 years. New England Journal of Medicine, December 2020, overlapping curves. Red is drug-coated devices, blue is uncoated devices. That's data now through 4 years. Hazard ratio is 1.06 with a confidence interval incorporating 1. Critical limb patients, it's intermittent claudication patients, similar signals. You can see the dramatic difference in all-cause mortality between the two. But again, that the red and blue curves are overlapped, red representing drug-coated devices, blue non-drug-coated devices. We also had an updated summary level meta-analysis. So just like the Katsanos meta-analysis was a summary level meta-analysis of published trials and abstracts and presentations, there was an updated one done by Ramon Varco and colleagues earlier this year. What did that show? Well, now that we have more data with more follow-up time, we're no longer seeing a signal of harm associated with drug-coated devices. And in particular, again, there was only 3 studies that had data for 4 to 5 years in the Katsanos meta-analysis. Now you can see we have a number of additional trials reporting follow-up out to 5 years. And although there was still that, diamond, you can see highlighted here, slightly to the right of that curve, it does reach unity, it does reach the period of 1. And we could see that as we've added more follow-up time, that we've now seen that risk signal is attenuated. And I just like this because it shows you how fragile this signal was to start, right? So just with a little bit more follow-up time, we've dramatically seen a change in that risk associated with paclitaxel-coated devices. When you break that up by drug-eluting stents, drug-coated balloons, or dosages, you see again that there's no significant association between any of these and harm. What about the real-world evidence program? Well, this has been an incredibly important part of what the FDA is doing as part of the 21st Century Cures Act is how do we take real-world data, make it ready for regulatory science? How do we then use it to evaluate concerns like this? And again, these are timely analysis. And I'll show you what we've done at our program early after this controversy and then some other important studies have come out since then. So after the Katsanos meta-analysis was done in December 2018, was published, We had our first draft of our paper by January 1st of 2019. It was pretty terrible New Year's Eve, but we were able to really get out two important papers that I think made a very important early call that we can use real-world data to help support evaluating the safety of these devices. The one on the left here was published in JAMA Cardiology, the one on the right in JACC. And both of these analyses looked at our patients in Medicare data set. On the left, it was only the year 2017, looking at drug-coated balloons and drug-eluting stents, really meant as a proof of concept of what you can do with these device coding that we have available. On the right here was just drug-eluting stents, as these were approved much earlier, and also had a specific ICD-9 code for them that was created after the Zilver PTX came to market. And you can see both here that there is really very similar mortality for both non-drug coded and drug coded devices. On the left, passing 2 years, on the right, passing 4.5 years now. So after we presented this to the FDA, we were asked to create a larger prospective, it's like a prospective retrospective study, I like to say, an ongoing study of data that's being collected at our institutions again. We've now totaled over 170,000 patients who were treated between 2015 and 2018 at just around 3,000 U.S. institutions. And again, we have follow-up now through over 5 years. This was presented as a late breaker at the ACC earlier this year and published in JAMA Internal Medicine. And what did we find? Again, drug-coated versus non-drug-coated devices, overlapping mortality curves here, extending again out past 5 years. We had over 40,000 patients passing 4 years. You break that down by low-risk patient cohorts, quartile of comorbidities, where was the procedure done, what was the device, can't replicate any signal of harm associated with these devices, whichever way we turn the data. Optum is a Medicare Advantage cohort. So one of the critiques was, oh, you have a sicker population because they're Medicare patients. Well, traditionally Medicare Advantage was let me just make sure this slows down, was a healthier cohort of patients. And so we looked at Medicare Advantage patients, again, just totaling over 15,000 patients, follow-up extending through 4 years. Again, no difference in mortality associated with drug-coated devices in a separate group of Medicare patients. My buddy Tony Gutierrez published this data set from the Veterans Health Administration. And I thought this was a really nice study because these, again, are unique patients we had not studied in the US yet, but also he was able to generate causes of death by type. And so on the left here, it's the Kaplan-Meier curves for more than 10,000 patients. We can see the adjusted hazard ratio of 1.06, incorporating 1 without a signal of harm. And then if you look at the different causes of mortality, on the right here, you can see in blue is non-drug-coated devices, orange is the drug-coated devices, and really a similar distribution of causes of death, irrespective of how you were treated. So, I like to end on this slide. I know it's busy, but I want to just remind everyone that these are the data that generated out of Katsanos meta-analysis. It was looked at by Viva, and then it was updated by the FDA, and then updated by the Viva NAMSA meta-analysis. And I want to note two things. First off, these are very similar data just being looked at over and over again. So this isn't new data. And these are the only data that have shown any harm. And what's happened is every time we've added in more patients who were lost to follow-up, as we've acquired more long-term follow-up for patients in these studies, this risk is attenuated closer and closer to 1. There's an ongoing patient-level meta-analysis that is probably going to be ready in the spring, and my expectation is we'll continue to see this trend. But I also want to point out now that we have all these data here. These circles represent the size of these studies, and you can see there we have not replicated a signal of harm in any of the data that I've presented to you today outside of the Katsanos meta-analysis and those similar pivotal trials that were analyzed. So it's hard to believe that this signal is real when we can't find it in a prospective randomized trial, in sub-analyses of a randomized trial, in multiple real-world analyses. And that's why my practice didn't change after this data came to form. So I'll end with this. What more can we do? Again, no difference in survival, 1 RCT, 1 at sub-analysis. No difference in survival in an updated summary level meta-analysis. No difference in survival in more than 6 real-world studies. We're waiting now for a final word from the FDA and how things will progress. I think probably won't hear anything until next year, but hopefully we can soon say that this controversy is done. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, this is a fantastic overview with so many questions. I think if anybody in the audience first has a question, Bhaskar?
2 questions. One is, we know claudicants mortality in the next 3 to 4 years is anywhere between 25 to 30%. And CLI is obviously really bad, like almost 60, 70%. So truly to perform a randomized study, to have a decent statistical power of 80, I mean, you can show 300 patients, 400 patients, and the curves don't cross. Truly, what is the real number we need? And my second question is, has there been any autopsies done, especially with regards to evaluating the cardiac in non and those who receive drug-coated technologies? Thank you.
Yeah, great questions. To the first point, this came up at the FDA panel. They did an analysis. So to power a randomized trial to look at all-cause mortality between 3 to 5 years would require 20 to 40,000 patients. And so that was actually what pivoted the FDA to reaching out and saying, well, we need another data source to understand how to survey these patients, and how we got even more involved. But I think it's a great point that a lot of these trials are going to remain underpowered for looking at mortality. But it goes back to the whole point of this controversy. There was 900 patients at 4 to 5 years in the Katsana signal with a lot of flaws. And so, there's a little bit of chasing our tail here. Is why do we look at this in the first place? And do we need to look at this if we can't explain mechanistically why this is connected? If we can't show any theory, even a dose response, that there's connection between these devices and mortality, why are we having this conversation? And so, I think that hopefully what we've presented in 170,000 real world patients, and if you read the JAMA Internal Medicine paper, we spent a lot of time what we do call pseudo randomization. We try this natural randomization there, and you can see we can't twist the data to make a signal of harm. But we're never going to get a randomized trial for this. We're not. And so I think we have to use the evidence that we have available. We have to understand if we believe that there is any mechanistic connection here, which many of us do not. And again, the origins of this are questionable to start. For the second part, there's been mortality data. There was mortality data, autopsy data presented at the panel, and we saw Dr. Finn yesterday, who's done a lot of that. And again, there's depositions we know of paclitaxel in distal tissues and some systemic absorption, but no one again has seen any connection between a cause of death and that paclitaxel. And so if you think about this, if you go through all the adjudicated causes of death in many of these trials, I mean, there's motor vehicle accidents, there are suicide, there's overdose, whatever. So none of these, if you actually tease them apart, seem to be related to paclitaxel, and no one is mechanistically, again, demonstrated. And the best slide that came out of this early on was the amount of paclitaxel given to a breast cancer patient versus what's on a device, and it's dramatically different. And that oncologists came to our conferences and be like, you guys are messing with 2.5 milligrams of paclitaxel. We give 10,000 times that dose. If we haven't seen a long-term harm with this, why would we see it with 2.5 milligrams? And again, there's some debate on that connection, but I think that's valuable information.
Any other questions from the audience? I have a question for you, Eric. I mean, the thing that's very important is that even now in today's day and age, the FDA put out the mandate that we have to inform the patients, and they haven't gone back on that. And I think that puts us practitioners who, like you, believe that drug-coated therapy may be the best therapy for certain patients in our population. But when is the FDA, you think, in your opinion, and I know it's an opinion, going to come out with some other statement? Because I think, and how do you think that practitioners should approach doing this? Do they need to go and inform their patients about this trial, or whatever, this result, which may be flawed, or can they go forward with confidence?
Yeah, important questions. I think the FDA, and again, I'm going to summarize my own take on it, but I think the FDA felt that they made the appropriate decision at the time, and they haven't felt the pressure to revisit that right now because these are still on the market, they're still available to patients, and they've led it to us as clinicians to have to deal with that. Now, is that fair for us? I think that's a challenge for all of us, especially in a world where we're worried about being sued and all this sort of thing. But I think from the FDA standpoint is they felt like leaving them on the market, having them available to us and still being used is probably where they were at, and that they remain at until, we can really convince them to come back to the table, which hasn't been seen yet. And I think the hope is the individual patient level meta-analysis in the spring is the last thing on their checklist, and then we could hopefully get back to the table and discuss how to move forward. In the meantime, I started this and I had a whole protocol, and I usually give a talk about how I talk to my patients and document
Right.
I've been asked to do this many times, but I've had this conversation so many times, and I think a lot of people who are dealing with these patients on this panel and this audience, most of these conversations go here. I want to tell you a little bit about this device we may need to use, and I'll start my spiel, and then the patient will go, "Doc, listen, just do what you think's best for me."
Right.
And like about 80% do that. 20%, want to really delve into it. And so, my theme has always been, I try to have more than one conversation. So most of my patients I'll see in clinic. I'll see them again on the pre-side before we bring them, for sedation. And I have that same conversation. There are some concerns. I feel that these data, I'll give them my opinion and we have a conversation. I document that. And,
Wow.
and we go on from there.
Dr. Mehran?
So Eric, thank you. What a great presentation. It's so nice to see you in person. I think it's important that you also say that the data that you're showing is mostly these large administrative databases that have a lot of flaws in them. So I think it's fair to say and not be so hopeful that the FDA is going to say, well, everything you've done before is wrong because now these administrative data are showing something different. And I think that the only thing that gives me a good feeling about all of this is the randomized clinical trials, especially when you're looking at real evidence and true follow-up and understanding that these patients are somewhat equal because the confounders are tremendous. And I think this better than anyone. So I wouldn't be so hopeful that FDA is going to look at this and then lift all of their restrictions on what was seen from previous randomized trials and IPD analyses. And I do think that it's unfortunate because I also don't believe there is an important difference, but I don't think that just looking at hundreds of thousands of patients in a CMS database in a non-randomized fashion is going to ease the pain of what we saw in the previous meta-analysis.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I mean, I think there's two considerations here. Is one, we're stuck then because we can't do that randomized trial we'd love to do. And we saw this for stent thrombosis doing very well in the DAP study.
But they were right?
Yeah.
The stent thrombosis data way back when was correct. Those first generation drug-eluting stents did have increased stent thrombosis. And that's what led the innovative pattern to now get to the second and third, better biodegradable polymers, better drug delivery, thinner struts, all those things. And I think that's what needs to happen probably in the drug-coated balloon arena.
Yeah, but you can make the case also that we knew why, right? We had a mechanism. We knew stent thrombosis was related to poor adverse events. We have no mechanistic reason why this is happening. This came out of left field. We don't randomize trials for drug-coated devices to cure mortality. That's not an indication for these devices.
No, I understand.
I understand that. But yeah, so we're both, sharing the same passion here. And I think that the hard part here is the field's done if we don't find another way. And I think that,
I don't think so because we are using it. And I think that's how FDA sees it.
Yeah.
And FDA is also very, and we're lucky that we have FDA actually.
Yeah.
Because we should be really thinking about how good that agency is for us because it really is looking out for the safety for our patients, which could be us in one day. And so I think they're doing a good job and they saw something. And I don't think that what they did was they had to do what they did. And now the question is, how do you go back?
Yeah. And again, and I'll say the second thing about the real world data is, we design all these studies with the FDA, and this has been part of their mandate of post-market approval safety evaluation is using real world data. And so we have a very, systematic way. It's all pre-specified. We had a methods paper. So we love trials. And if I could have done a trial with you on this, it would have been amazing. But, the FDA has been incredibly responsive. There's an aortic safety panel coming up. We're doing something very similar for that. And this is, I think, a little bit of a change by the FDA to start looking at data a little bit differently on the post-market side, not the pre-market side, as you very well know. So it'll be interesting.
Fantastic discussion. Thank you.